Hello, 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 all of you out there in comicdom, all you geeks and geekettes. It's time for another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, 44th chapter. Do you feel lucky today? Well, do you, nerd? Okay, first question is from John Morgan. Bat Neil. You laugh at Red Tornado, mock Aquaman, dislike Green Arrow. Which JLAers do you like other than Batman and Superman? Um, Yeah, I mock Red Tornado. I don't really laugh. Well, I don't really laugh at Red Tornado. I just find amusing the diehard fans of Red Tornado. They they say Red Tornado is their favorite comic book character of all time, and they lament the fact that he's not more popular. Well, he's just not more popular. I mean, what can you do? I don't quite understand the attraction to him. I mean, maybe it's just you know, they've chosen this obscure character to back, and it's theirs. It's something that belongs to them. I don't know, but I've heard this like my entire fan life. You know, when I first became aware of other fans at comic book conventions and stuff, there's just these Red Tornado backers. I mock Aquaman because Aquaman is a poor man's Namor. He's a dollar store submariner. I mean, what can I say? There's not a whole lot to recommend the guy. I've never found the character interesting. I don't dislike Green Arrow. Um, I didn't really like the portrayal of Oliver Queen. I didn't like the story surrounding the portrayal of Oliver Queen as a bleeding heart liberal. Um, I thought they were straining to be relevant, and I found them schmaltzy and sort of naive. Um, but I like Oliver Queen. I like him as a character, even though he is a liberal. He's principled and brave and courageous and tough and all that stuff. And, him being a liberal makes him more interesting to me. I wish more liberals thought the conservatives were interesting, but that's just not the way it is. Now, as far as the Justice League goes, I mean, I got no problem with the Justice League. There's the Red Tornado. I've never been that big a fan. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, yeah, I love Batman, Superman. I like Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Arrow, Green Lantern. I followed them all when I was a kid, but I never got a big kick out of the JLA. Um, well, this cover. This is one of the reasons. It's right here on the cover of the very first issue of Justice League. What are they doing? They're sitting around a table. They're sitting around a table, and Flash is playing chess with a guy with a weird thing on his head, and that's their idea of a number one cover. You think they would have made a bigger deal out of all these superheroes getting together, but they didn't. And this kind of continues on through the series. Now, this is the first issue of Justice League I bought as a kid. This is the first one I was aware of, and it wasn't until issue 10. Maybe I saw the earlier covers and was so unimpressed I didn't buy them. But I think it was summertime. I was at the shore. I'd read all the Marvel comics, and I thought, well, let me pick this one up. It's got everybody in it, and there's Batman and Superman. I like them a whole lot. But it was uninteresting. I also bought this one. I'm going to go through my history of buying the JLA. Get super nerdy here with you. What I didn't like about these stories was that all the great heroes together, except they were never together. And in every story, they would meet and the threat would arrive. And then they would separate into pairs. Wonder Woman and Green Lantern would go to Pluto, and Flash and Aquaman would go to Atlantis, and Green Arrow and the Atom would go to the White House. And they would all separate to fight whatever threat it was. I mean, coincidentally, every month the Justice League was threatened by some bad guy who attacked them on multiple fronts across the globe, forcing them to all split up. So very seldom did you ever see them all fighting together. And of course, when they went to battle these threats, somehow magically the threats perfectly matched their abilities. Martian Manhunter, you knew when he teamed up with Wonder Woman and went off, to the Grand Canyon, that there was going to be fire somewhere. so he'd be weakened. That kind of thing, that kind of coincidence that I really don't like. So the covers promised you the JLA in action together, but they seldom ever were. And they were all so often presented as victims on the covers. They're never victorious. They were trapped, or in this case, they're being banished. You know, um, and it really wasn't until uh, the what would become a event every summer, which would be the Justice League meeting up with the Justice Society of America, and basically the introduction of Earth 2 into DC continuity. You know, it wasn't until then I started buying the issues again. I mean, as you can see, I showed you every issue I bought, and I was buying it sporadically. Every once in a while, I'd pick it up and was not following this title regularly. But when I saw the Justice Society, I didn't really know who they were, but I thought, hey, it's a bunch of new superheroes. I'll check this out. And every summer, I would buy those two issues um, that would come out. One in June generally, and one in August. And I wouldn't buy it again until the next year when here's another example. This was an issue I bought. I bought it. This is like the last regular issue I bought that didn't involve Earth 2. And again, they're victims. They're captive of some, weird bee woman. Nothing terribly heroic here. I mean, I don't mind the characters being in jeopardy on a cover. That certainly makes sense. But they were always captive. They're always being pushed around by somebody. Just very unheroic. Anyway, the next summer, again, Justice Society of America and Earth 2. And this one, they go to Earth 3. Woohoo! And, again, it was two issues of, the Justice League versus, a whole different bunch of characters I'd never seen before. So it was a well-populated comic book filled with, costume. Look, this one promises 15 superstars. So yeah, lots of superheroes for your money. But and this is the last issue of Justice League I ever bought because I just lost interest in it. The title, even with all the new superheroes and visiting Earth 2 and exploring this new continuity, I just lost interest in the title. It wasn't as engaging to me as let's say the Fantastic Four. So my favorite DC team up book of all time, and I've never made a secret of this, has always been Batman and the Outsiders. Mike Barr and Jim Aparo just did a fantastic job of launching this title and had everything that an ensemble group book should have. It had all the inner dynamics and conflicts and the soap opera and everything that brought you back month to month, as well as some terrific action. And a brand new cast, or a mostly brand new cast of companions, or for Batman to organize. And I enjoyed that title a whole bunch. Hey, a lot of these covers I pulled from the Grand Comic Book Database. If you don't know about the Grand Comic Book Database and you are a comic fan, you should know about it. The database lists every single comic ever published. You can find it there. Generally, you can see the covers, a description, and the list of talent. And it's an incredible wealth of comic book information, very reliable, very accurate, constantly being updated, and it's worth your time. And if you go there and you like it, it's worth a donation. I donate them to them regularly because I use it as a resource all the time. And I'd like to recommend it to any of you who have never seen it before. The Grand Comic Book Database. Ben Baker asks, how did you turn Clinton Cash from a detail-heavy book with many footnotes, etc., into an accessible graphic novel? Well, if you didn't know already, I adapted Peter Schweitzer's expose of the Clinton Foundation, Clinton Cash, into a graphic novel. It was an Amazon bestseller for a while and sold a lot of copies. Has some terrific artwork. Graham Nolan, Sergio Cariello, Paul Ravoche, and coloring by Brett Smith. And it raised quite a ruckus. And if I hadn't already burnt my bridges in the comic book business, this would have done it for me. Now, Peter Schweitzer, who wrote the original book, readily admitted it was dry material. And it was going to be hard to turn into an engaging comic book project. And, I read the book. Ultimately, I read the book about 5 or 6 times while adapting it. And yeah, it's a lot of people meeting in rooms and getting in and out of cars and getting in and out of jets and things like that. And it doesn't make for very good comics. So what I did was I approached Peter by, I wrote the first 5 pages of how I would approach this project. And yes, Chelsea Clinton did actually say that, or often says that in her paid speeches. Um, so what I proposed to Peter was that to sort of stay with the facts of the story, but illustrate it, you know, almost turn it into a parody of the comic book medium itself. So a lot of the Clinton Cash graphic novel works as a satire of comics, as well as using the comic medium to make the points that Peter was making in the book clearer. And basically, my approach was the same as the National Lampoon. The National Lampoon used to have regular comic strips and comic book parodies in their pages. And what made them different than Mad Magazine was that they would use a straight comic book style. If you didn't read the captions and word balloons in a National Lampoon comic, it looked like a regular comic book. It wasn't until you read it that you realized it was a parody of comic books. And National Lampoon hired, some of the top talent in comics at the time. I mean, Bernie Wrightson, Neil Adams, Russ Heath, people like that to draw their comics. Barry Windsor Smith did an incredible Norman the Barbarian that recast Norman Mailer in the place of Conan. So um, it was this straight up approach, and the humor was in the captions and the balloons. And that's what I proposed to Peter. That's what I wrote in my 5 pager. And Peter, much to his credit, said that was the way to go. He loved it. He loved it. He said, just go wild. And he let us go nuts with his book. And, I don't think we could have done it otherwise. And so, yeah, we went wild. We went a little wild because the teams of lawyers that went over the book had us change a number of things, but we did stick to the facts. And when all was said and done, even Peter admitted that we made his case clearer than he did. But of course, we had, the medium of comics, the magic of comic books to help illustrate this very, very complex story of interactions and illegalities and midnight deals. It's a very complicated story, which is why a lot of people don't either know about it or understand all of it. But we went for it, and my goal, as I told Peter, was to make our graphic novel both funny and appalling. And in the end, he admitted that we had achieved both. Okay, Ben Baker, do you listen to music when you work? Um, yeah, I do. I do. And I've answered this one before, but I'll run through it quick for you again. I'm eclectic. I think everybody thinks they're eclectic. I guess I'm eclectic. People have told me I have an eclectic music taste. So anything might show up on my enormous playlist on my desktop. The Kinks, my favorite British invasion band. Sinatra, a lot of '80s music. Some classical music if I just really need ambient background noise. I like country. I like old school country, guys like George Jones and Johnny Cash. Um, and, groups like the Afro Celt sound system, great ambient noise for the background when I'm writing. So, a little bit of everything. I think I like, a little bit of every musical genre. But there's some you can only take so much of. I think 5 minutes of reggae a year is enough for anybody. So anyway, yes, I do listen to music while I work. WJ, we'll never know what that stands for. Chuck, if you could write any classic Marvel Western character, who would it be and what would you pitch? Who would be your choice to draw it? Have you ever wanted to write a Sergeant Rock story? I think Rawhide Kid, the Kirby version, there was an earlier version of Rawhide Kid at Marvel back when it was Atlas. But I like Rawhide Kid. One of the things I really like about him was he's a little guy. Uh, you know, I guess he's like 5'5" or something like that. So he's a little guy, and Kirby wrote him as, the underdog. He's always getting pushed around because, he's not a big bruiser of a dude who, but Kirby would stick him in a lot of fist fights to show off his abilities. I always wondered if Kirby was a Bob Steele fan. Bob Steele was from back in the golden age of the Cowboys in the 30s. Bob Steele would go on to play Duffy on F Troop. But back in the day, he was a rough, tough cowboy, but he was a little guy. And I wonder if Kirby based Rawhide Kid on him. Bob Steele was my dad's favorite cowboy. He called him the body puncher because whenever Bob Steele would get in a fight, he couldn't reach the bad guy's jaw, so he just gut punched the guy till he fell to the floor. So that's kind of like the Rawhide Kid character. Rawhide Kid did a lot of kicking, if I remember, and using furniture to fight with. So yeah, this is the one I would pick if I got to choose which Marvel Western character I would write. As far as Sergeant Rock goes, I did write a Sergeant Rock comic. I would love to have written more. We did a 50th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge special, and I wrote the entire thing. I think it's a 64 pager, and I got to work with my buddy Graham Nolan, Howard Chaykin, who I'd never worked with before. And we had a framing device story with Sarge at Bastogne with Eduardo Barreto on the artwork. And the highlight of the issue for me is I got to write a haunted tank story drawn by Russ Heath. And sadly, it turned out to be the last haunted tank story that Russ ever drew. So yeah, this was kind of a dream come true project for me because I love Sergeant Rock growing up. And yeah, I would have loved to have written more Rock, but it was not to be. But I feel this is a worthy effort. I'm very pleased with the end results on this one because I got to work with some of my pals and I got to work with a couple of real comic book legends. And Brian Boland frontispiece and this Dan Brereton front cover. I mean, it's a heck of a package if you can find it somewhere. Lemuel Eubanks, is there a prose writer that you would like to work with? Work with, I'm not sure what you mean, but uh, I, I'm going to take it that you mean work with as far as a comic book adaptation. And Bernard Cornwell is a guy I'd love to adapt into graphic novel form, if only because I think his Sharp novels, which have been turned into a series of TV movies with Sean Bean. His Sharp novels really would lend themselves to comic book adaptations. And I was actually interested enough in doing this that I approached his people and and asked them about this. I even had an artist, Stev Pauls, draw up some sample pictures of Sharp and some of the other characters. And I think one of the reasons it would be a terrific graphic novel series is because, first of all, it has a ready audience. Millions of people have read these novels or seen the TV show. Uh, and also, Cornwell's work lends itself to comics because there's plenty of action and we learn about characters as they do things. There's tremendous locales. And there's all the rising action, high stakes, and suspense, and everything else that you really need in a comic book. Um, and the other thing about that makes it attractive is it's the colorful, it's the Napoleonic period for the most part, and comics you know allow for visualization. So this wonderfully colorful period could be real eye candy on the page. Um, you know, with all the colorful outfits and the huge scale of the battles, and I think this would have been a great series. Unfortunately, I never heard anything back from the Cornwell people, so I don't know if Bernard Cornwell ever saw any of my emails or messages. But sadly, this didn't come to be. Another series of Cornwell's that I would love to adapt is his Grail Quest. It takes place during the Hundred Years' War. It follows the adventures of an English longbowman in the conflict in France when the English army basically invaded France and roamed around for a long time, just raising havoc across the French countryside. But this series, like everything Cornwell writes, it's got very vivid characters, terrific action, a lot of suspense, rising tension, all the rest of it, and wonderfully um researched action sequences. Cornwell writes tremendous action, and we're going to talk a little bit more about action very, very soon, right here on the Ask Chuck Dixon broadcast. Remy Wilkins says, "What's your favorite comic book that you would have zero interest in writing?" I wouldn't want to write Thor. I couldn't. Yeah, Thor's not one I think. I don't think I could top Lee and Kirby on anything that they did. I'm not looking to top them, but I know I couldn't come anywhere near topping on Thor. I think the Lee and Kirby on Thor is as close to comic book perfection as you get. The Mangog saga alone, and then the Search for Galactus. Those two arcs are just incredible. I can't imagine ever doing anything that come close to that. Anything I would do would just pale into insignificance. So I wouldn't want to tackle Thor. It's and yeah, yeah, but I love it. I do love it. Okay, Andrew Runyon. This is going to get deep, folks. I love to write action, even more than writing dialogue. Do you have any advice for tightening and clarifying action scenes? Well, great action scenes, need to be multi-layered. They need to have a lot of elements in motion. You can't just have two guys fighting each other and that's the end of it. You got to have a whole bunch of different stuff going on at one time. And that involves, the passage of time, the locale, the number of characters, the number of threats, rising action, basically, rising stakes. And a lot goes into this. One thing that action scenes can um, benefit from is the ticking clock. And I don't mean literally a time bomb. Ticking clock can be anything. And I'm going to demonstrate that in more detail coming up. Another thing is locale. The fight takes place in interesting locales, especially if the locale itself is a threat. Either gravity or a raging fire. The aqueduct sequence in Die Hard 3 comes to mind because it's a unique location, never before seen in a movie, and it leads to a terrific climax, to a terrific action set piece as Bruce Willis steals a truck and has to race through the aqueduct with water filling it up from behind the entire time. If you've never read about the New York aqueducts and the projects to dig them, they call these guys sand hogs, and they would spend basically decades building these enormous tunnels that do nothing but carry water to the city of New York from lakes hundreds and hundreds of miles away. It's a heck of a story in itself, and a really terrific place to set an action scene. um, the scene in Raiders where they're fighting around that airplane is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's locale and it's got the ticking clock and it's multi-layered. You got Indy fighting this big bruiser Teutonic monster guy, and where they're fighting is around a two-engine German aircraft that the engines are running. The aircraft is in motion. It's kind of turning around and around on this hard stand. At the same time, you have a gasoline truck that's been holed by machine gun fire, and gas is pooling and running toward the plane that they're fighting around. So Indy not only has to fight this guy who's, this guy's got 50 pounds of muscle on him. He's beating the living daylights out of him. He not only got to fight this guy, he's got to watch out for those whirling propellers and the tires of the plane as it goes around. And he's also, you know, blissfully unaware that a pool of gasoline, of this lake of incendiaries, is building up beneath the plane, which could catch fire at any second and immolate him. So there you go. I mean, you've got 3 layers of threat, and then the locale is interesting. And of course, you got the ticking clock. That gasoline is going to explode at some point. There's a Korean movie, just a terrific Korean action film called The Pirates. And it's got a scene that illustrates everything that I'm talking about. There's a chase in the movie. You have two different pirate groups looking for the MacGuffin, the object of value that they need. And the male pirate gets involved in this chase where he steals whatever it was, and he's running away from the town's soldiers. At the same time, the female pilot lead, who also wants this MacGuffin, is in pursuit of him. So he's being pursued by the soldiers and by the female pirate. The female pirate, for her means of transportation, is sliding down a water flume with a crossbow, hunting him down. And of course, you got the soldiers chasing both of them. What complicates things is early on in the scene, they establish this enormous water wheel that is at the top of this water flume, this huge wheel. And at some point in the story, a explosive harpoon is misaimed and it blows the wheel from its moorings. And now the wheel is in motion. And it's going to crush the populace. You have this wheel, it's like, 50 feet high, and it's now free to roam wherever it will through this Korean port. Now, at the same time, the soldiers are still chasing that wagon with the male lead in it. And the girl is still riding down the log flume or the water flume until the wheel crosses it and destroys the level of the aqueduct above her. And the whole thing begins to collapse with her racing just ahead of the collapsing superstructure. And the wheel continues to roll on through town, destroying houses and property and crushing people underneath it. And barely missing our male lead and his buddy. Now, eventually, the female and male lead, after some crazy action, they get together and there's conflict. They both want the same thing. And she's going to have it out with him. But soldiers on the city's walls have the drop on them. So they're caught. Their little fight doesn't mean anything to anybody. And there's some dramatic stuff that happens and all the rest of it. But then what did we forget? The principals forgot it, and maybe you watching it forgot it, and everybody in the movie forgot it. But that wheel is still rolling. It's still rolling downhill, and still causing havoc amongst the populace. Now the thing is when you're watching this movie, you may have forgotten consciously the wheel was there, but there's a background tension. There's something going on behind and underneath this action scene, this conflict between the two principals. There's something going on beyond their little problems, and it's this wheel. So you're like subconsciously aware that there's a rising level of threat, a potentially dangerous element loose in this environment. And of course, it hones right in on our principals. They run to escape. There's some explosives involved because why not? The wheel blows up, and that's the end of our action scene. And it serves its purpose because it ultimately knocks down all the soldiers who were threatening both of them, and it separates the two of them from one another so that they can renew their conflict later on in the film. So the two principals escape separately to join up again, later on. But you see where ticking clock, environment, and multi-layered action scene all come together here. Now, the other thing you addressed was clarity. And clarity is important because if your action scene isn't clear, it's going to have no impact because you're going to literally lose the reader, lose the viewer. They're not going to know where they are in the story. They're not going to be able to relate to the characters because they've lost sense of where everybody is. And that way they don't really, it's hard to understand what's happening. It's hard to be engaged when you get lost. You see these movies or there's like these quick cut action scenes. I mean, literally just a few frames and they cut back and forth. Well, that's kind of a lot of times that's that's done without a thought to any kind of rhythm or pacing or anything else. So you can easily get lost in these quick cut sequences. And often, if you take a quick cut sequence, an action sequence, a fight or whatever, and you watch it without the sound, it makes no sense. You get completely lost. A lot of times they use sound effects to help keep you engaged, keep you grounded, keep you understanding what's going on, because they've cut it so severely that you simply can't follow it. There's a real art to doing those quick cut action scenes, and a lot of editors simply aren't up to it. I mean, you've seen it. You've seen them, where you just lose all interest because it's completely lost you. Now, a model of a complex action scene that's clear throughout is Full Metal Jacket, the final action set piece at the end of the film, where the Marines are at the city of Wei after the Tet Offensive, and they're taking the city of Wei. It's 1968. They're taking it back from the Viet Cong. So it's house to house fighting, it's street to street fighting, and it's grim and it's nasty. And it's complicated by a sniper. There's a sniper firing at the unit, and they don't know where it's coming from. And they have to identify where it's coming from and negate it. And they identify what they think is the building that the sniper is in, but they're wrong. There's a lot of tension building up. This sniper has them zeroed in and could kill any one of them at any moment. And so they've got to figure out exactly where this person is and take them out. And meanwhile, the sniper is taking them down one by one. So they finally realize that it's the interior of this burning building. They find cover to approach it. And the whole while, Stanley Kubrick keeps you. I mean, it's a very complex action scene, but you never get lost and you never think about how complex it is. Kubrick keeps you focused on the Marines and their the perilous situation that they're in, their sense of loss, their anger, their uncertainty, and he keeps you focused on all that while moving you around this very, very complex environment of these buildings. It's kind of like this mini maze of buildings. And we have exchanges between them, and there's conflict over how to approach this. And like I said, there's loss. We've learned to like these guys, learned to love these guys, and now we're seeing them being picked off one by one. After all the things they've been through, here they are, just up against one gunman who's just taking them down. And you're starting to get a little frustrated. You're sharing their frustration. You're sharing their anger. And you want to see this end. And eventually they move into the building where the sniper is concealed, or they believe the sniper is concealed. And the sniper is revealed. It turns out to be a young Vietnamese girl. And she's taken out. And that's a heartbreaking scene. So this one scene, this one action scene, accomplishes so much for the movie. It kind of brings the whole movie to a head. It's a logical conclusion to everything that's happened. But more importantly for me, and more importantly for the question here, is that Kubrick maintains clarity throughout. If you've already seen this movie, if you've never seen this movie, you've got to see this movie. But if you've already seen this movie, try rewatching it with what I said in mind. You probably didn't think when you were watching it what a technical accomplishment that scene is, but it is, because it's not easy to write something with that many moving parts and write it so that the viewer can always recognize where they are, always, understand that even when they can't see everything on the screen, they know where they are in the movie, literally know where they are in the set. So there you go. There you go. Action, clarity, multi-layers, ticking clock, and interesting environments all help to build an action scene bit by bit. Hey, if you liked this video, if you found it educational, entertaining, edifying, or whatever, you know, uh, please think about liking it. Hit that like button. That helps me, that helps YouTube to let other viewers know, hey, these people like this. You might like it too. You share some of the same interest with these likers. So that's how that works. Feed the algorithm, as it were. And I would really appreciate it. And as I always assure you, it will not cost you a thin dime. So just give me that like, and everybody will be happier for it. That's it for me. I'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'll see you down the road.